The execution room was steeped in heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Roberto, seated in the electric chair, stared fixedly at a distant point, as if he were already beyond time and space. His wrists were strapped with leather restraints, yet there was no fear in his eyes. Instead, there was something far more unsettling, a calmness that seemed to hide an abyss of pain. "Bring me my dog," he said suddenly, his voice echoing in the room. The request drew confused looks from the guards, the chaplain, and even the prison warden. "Please. Before I die. I want to see him one last time." 3 months earlier, at the farm where Roberto worked, the day had started like any other. The sun warmed the fields, and children's laughter filled the air. Angela, the 10-year-old daughter of Farmer Artur, ran between the trees with Bob, the loyal German shepherd who never left her side. Roberto, a man of few words and calloused hands, watched the scene with a faint smile. To him, this land was more than just a job, it was his life. That morning, Angela didn't show up for breakfast. Artur thought she was playing in the fields, but when he called her name and got no response, a cold chill ran down his spine. Minutes turned into hours. The once cheerful farm descended into chaos. The police searched the property. Roberto, like everyone else, joined the search. "She must be around here," he said, his voice trembling. But when they found a blood-stained dress and a torn teddy bear in his cabin, everything changed. The trial became a public spectacle. The newspapers called him a monster. The villagers called him a murderer. The prosecutor brandished the evidence like a hammer: the dress, the toy, the blood. Even without a body, the conviction seemed inevitable. "I didn't do it," Roberto repeated, but no one listened. The frail figure of Luciana, Angela's mother, stood up in court. "Tell me where my daughter is," she screamed, her pain cutting through the air. Artur, the father, gave Roberto a look filled with hatred. "You don't even deserve a final prayer." Back in his cell, Roberto spent his days in silence. The guards avoided speaking to him. He had no visitors. The only sound was the distant ticking of a clock, marking the time he had left. Meanwhile, on the farm, Bob wandered the fields, seeming to search for something, or someone. At night, he returned to Roberto's cabin, lying near the empty bed and whimpering softly, as if feeling his owner's absence. Loudspeaker, if this story has captured your attention, subscribe to the Fans of Animals channel and don't miss the next emotional stories. In the cold cell, Roberto rested his face in his hands. His thoughts drifted back to the day he found Bob, a scrawny, injured puppy near a stream. "You're my only family now," he had said then. A heavy sigh escaped his lips. He wondered if Bob was okay, if he was still waiting for him. Meanwhile, Bob barked incessantly near a tree at the back of the farm. The workers, tired of the noise, tried to shoo him away, but the dog always returned to the same spot. "Leave him," said Silverio, the eldest of the workers, watching the animal with a thoughtful gaze. "Maybe he knows something we don't." Roberto was led to the death chamber in silence, his footsteps echoing against the cold cement floor. Each sound felt like a ticking clock, counting down the final seconds of his life. The guard said nothing, but the weight of their gazes conveyed more than words could. In the execution room, the atmosphere was stifling, heavy with tension. Bob, the German shepherd, was in the prison yard, pulling at his leash and barking frantically as if sensing something terrible was about to happen. "Let him in," Roberto said, his voice firm and hoarse. The chaplain hesitated but signaled for the guards to grant the request. As soon as Bob entered the room, he ran to Roberto, sitting by his side and resting his head on his lap, letting out a low whimper. "For the first time in weeks," Roberto smiled. "You've always been with me, my friend," he whispered, stroking the dog's fur. Loudspeaker, if you're captivated by this story, don't forget to subscribe to the Fans of Animals channel and stay tuned for more emotional narratives. Suddenly, a guard rushed into the room with a sealed envelope. "Wait," he shouted, his face pale. Everyone froze. "This just arrived. It's an anonymous letter, with information about the case." The chaplain took the envelope with trembling hands, opened it, and began reading aloud. The room fell into a stunned silence. The letter said, "I am the one responsible for what happened to Angela. Roberto is innocent. I hid the evidence to frame him. The blood-stained dress and the teddy bear were planted. It was all a plan to cover my mistake." The revelation caused an uproar. Some shouted, others were speechless. Roberto, with his eyes locked on Bob, whispered, "He knows. Bob knows who did this. What happens next?" Who is the real culprit? Will Roberto finally be freed? Stay tuned to find out how this emotional story unfolds to its shocking conclusion. The room remained in chaos as Bob barked relentlessly, tugging harder at his leash. One of the guards, uncertain but compelled by the urgency, decided to release him. The dog bolted toward the door, scratching at it with desperation, as if trying to escape. "Follow the dog," the chaplain shouted. Two guards flung the door open and trailed Bob through the prison's winding corridors. Meanwhile, Roberto remained strapped to the electric chair, motionless but changed. Hope had ignited within him. He knew Bob was trying to communicate something. "Trust him," Roberto called out, his voice filled with raw emotion. The judge hesitated but then ordered the execution to be suspended until the matter was resolved. Cut to the prison corridors. Bob raced with purpose, his paws pounding against the cold floors, leading the guards with unerring precision. He stopped at the office of a prison staff member, the chief inspector who had overseen Roberto's case. Inside, the inspector sat, his hands trembling as he tried to conceal something in his desk drawer. Bob growled deeply, his eyes locked onto the man. "Open the drawer," one guard commanded. The inspector resisted but was quickly overpowered. Inside, they found damning evidence: photographs of Angela, her blood-stained dress, and a letter written in the same handwriting as the anonymous confession. "You?" one guard asked in disbelief. "Why?" Cornered, the inspector stammered, I didn't mean to hurt her. It was an accident. I met her at that party. She threatened to tell my wife everything. I lost control." His voice cracked as he broke into sobs, but his confession was undeniable. He had killed Angela and framed Roberto to cover his tracks. Back in the execution chamber, the guards returned, the inspector in handcuffs and the evidence in tow. The judge looked at Roberto with a face full of regret. "Mr. Roberto Alves, you are hereby declared innocent. You are free to go." The straps binding Roberto were undone, and he rose slowly, his body weak but his spirit unbroken. Bob sprinted toward him, leaping into his arms. Roberto embraced the dog tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I knew you'd save me, partner," Roberto whispered to Bob. Cut to the courtroom weeks later. The inspector faced trial and was convicted for Angela's murder. Roberto, present but composed, spoke with quiet dignity. "I don't seek revenge, only justice. And justice came through my loyal friend, Bob. He gave me a second chance at life." Roberto and Bob now walk through an open field, far from the walls of the prison and closer to where it all began. Roberto throws a ball, and Bob chases it eagerly, his tail wagging with pure joy. "We're free now," Roberto says softly, gazing toward the horizon. As the sun sets, these words appear: "True loyalty overcomes all injustice. Let us cherish those who love us unconditionally." The end.